We will insert the air horn sound effect later. This is a co-production of The Appeal and Now This. I'm your host for today, Jay Willis. Members of Congress, by and large, are rich. The median net worth of a member of Congress is around $1 million, and more than half of the members of the current Congress are millionaires. In the House, it's Montana Republican Greg Gianforte, who leads the pack at about $189 million. In the Senate, it is Florida Republican Rick Scott, who edges him with a little over $250 million in estimated worth. Historically, Congress has been a domain of wealthy people. Now, full history of sort of this merger of wealth and politics in this country is a bit beyond the scope of our show today, but generally it requires money to accumulate influence, run campaigns, and build a network of supporters who are often wealthy themselves. And also historically, this has been reflected in how policy gets done in Washington, where corporate interests reliably get a seat at the table and working class people end up being an afterthought if they're included at all. So if you'll remember Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from a couple of years ago, according to the Washington Post, more than 3/4 of that bill's $1.1 trillion worth of individual tax cuts went to people who earn more than $200,000 a year. That's some 5% of American taxpayers. But especially over the past several years, we've seen some notable exceptions to this general rule too. Democratic lawmakers who are unseating long-term incumbents, ending political dynasties, building grassroots networks of small dollar supporters, and ultimately pushing the agendas of working families in Washington, campaigning on the promise of opposing sort of politics as usual. And often they've done so in the face of considerable headwinds from the party establishment. In July 2019, a senior Democratic source told Fox News, in reference to the Justice Democrats' plans to challenge incumbent Democrats, quote, "No one is afraid of those nerds. They don't have the ability to primary anyone," end quote. A year later, we are joined by several of those nerds who have proven that, quote, ably wrong. We've got Cori Bush, the Democratic nominee for Missouri's 1st Congressional District, who ended a 50-year political dynasty by defeating William Lacey Clay in the Democratic primary. We also have the nominee for New York's 16th Congressional District, Jamal Bowman, who defeated House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Eliot Engel, a 16-term incumbent. Also with us today is a member of kind of the vanguard of this movement, Michigan Representative and noted Squad co-founder Rashida Tlaib, who was elected in 2018. Thanks to all of you for joining us, and Representative Tlaib, I'd like to start with you first. To date, the Progressive Caucus in Congress has been relatively small, and I mean that as like a numerator relative to the denominator of the entire size of Congress. And it sometimes struggled to stop legislation it opposes or to consistently ensure the inclusion of progressive priorities in bills it might be inclined to support. But you know, as we get more of these candidates coming into office, knock on wood, hopefully, how will a progressive caucus that is increasing in size change your relationship with your colleagues, and maybe start to change that dynamic that we've been talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Jay, you know, the fact that many of us, I mean, most of us really didn't run to unseat or to, become first or anything. We ran because of our lived experiences, because we were tired of standing on the sidelines and thinking that change was coming, and it wasn't. And so much of what you see is a movement that is, it's really organic. It's beautifully organic, and it isn't just one organization or one person, but the fact that we see an uprising in our country right now of saying enough with corporations running our government, enough with not putting people first. And it really is the lived experiences. If you hear the story of Cori Bush or Jamal Bowman, it really isn't folks that ever thought about running for office, but were all of a sudden in this position of like, I can't not do anything right now. I can't just vote. I can't just protest. I got to get in there and be able to, again, take that lived experience that I have and try to change, have meaningful action and change for the people that helped raise me. And so, a lot of folks, when they look at this new Congress last year, I mean, it was like, oh, this is the most diverse Congress ever in the history of the United States Congress. And I say to folks, yeah, sure, we made history, and I'm all, of course, inspired by that. But it really is because many of us didn't have, I think one member of Congress, one of the first Native American women, didn't have health insurance until she became a member of Congress. Another lost her mom to the broken healthcare system. Another lost her son, Lucy May lost her only son, living child, to gun violence, was shot literally at a gas station for having the so-called wrong music on. I mean, these women and these folks are coming in again with these lived experiences and moving with a sense of urgency that wasn't there before. And I think that's why, Jay, there's such a disconnect. People can't relate to United States Congress because, yeah, majority of my colleagues are millionaires. Majority of my colleagues don't have those same lived experiences. Some were literally handed the position. Some were again, moving in a way that, for folks, we're very transactional. And again, what you see is, these labels of squad versus these are folks that are coming. No, I think I want people out in the community that understand that transformative change is happening because of them. It really, truly is. I mean, they're the ones asking us to run. They're the ones, I mean, if people had to ask me, they're like, Rashida, you need to do this. And so I just want to credit to all of them that people like us are still waiting to be asked to run or being urged to run. And that, I think, is what's going to transform Congress and transform a lot of these policies to actually make a difference in working families.
Thank you. Corey, I'll turn to you next. You hope to be joining Congress when you challenged Congressman Clay in 2018 in a race folks might be familiar with from the Netflix documentary Knock Down the House, which is something I had to double check. I remembered it as Bringing Down the House. Very different movie, turns out. You lost that race in 2018, but you ran it back this time and won. I'm wondering what changed over the past 2 years, and what message does that send to your, again, knock on wood, soon-to-be colleagues about sort of the state of the progressive movement and what it can hope to accomplish?
Yeah, well, thank you. And you put me behind Rashida Tlaib. I don't know how I can do this. No, so first of all, shout out to Rashida and Jamal. Just thank you for all the work that you all do. I'm inspired by both of you all the time. And Rashida, just been inspired by you for the last 2 years. So thank you for being that example and being so open and welcoming to Jamal and myself. Also, so, what changed for me was, in my team, my race was, first of all, visibility and, name recognition is huge. People don't know you're running, then they won't, they might not vote for you. Also, one thing that I feel we did wrong in our last race. So our community was full of Cori Bush signs, full of just everything was, oh, Cori Bush. But people didn't know, I didn't have my face on anything. And so if you didn't meet me, you didn't know who I was. And being in a predominantly African-American district, with the last name Bush, if you all only knew how much that last name pushes me, you're like, that name just causes a lot of trouble for me. People thought that I was a white man, and so it didn't play well. This time we had name recognition, we had visibility. The Knock Down the House was out, and so people knew us. They would see me coming towards their door and would say, "Hey, you're from that movie." So those things helped. We also started early again, and we were able to go ahead and go into those communities where we felt like we lacked, we lacked representation the last time, or we just didn't get to work those communities, on the ground as much as we wanted to. We decided this time, going straight in, we're not going to go to the gatekeepers. We're not going to pay attention to what endorsements we receive. Like, we're not going to do that. That's the way that everybody else says that you should run. But we saw that happen last time, and we saw a lot of the resistance. We're not going to do that this time. We're going straight to the people. And so that's what we did. Also, saying yes to be Senator Bernie Sanders' national surrogate for his 2020 presidential campaign. That helped out a lot because, after traveling with Netflix, for the film, we went straight to, I went to campaigning for Bernie Sanders, and then holding town halls and for Medicare for All, Green New Deal, and talking about economic justice. And so that really helped out a lot as far as visibility. And what that also did, it helped with fundraising. I'll be honest, I think we were less than $180,000 raised in 2018. So that was it was very difficult to raise money that, then. And we saw the numbers that came out that said that Black women raised the least out of everybody in 2018 for all those that ran for Congress. Well, this time we had to do fundraising different. I could no longer say, hey, $3, thank you for your $3. I appreciate that. That's all I'm really asking for you. That's what I did in 2018. It was just like, oh, whatever you have, just thank you. I didn't want to really ask people to really give, because I understood my own personal situation. So I didn't want to, just burden people with that. But then this time I was like, you know what? I got to raise more money because I got to be able to get the name out. We have to do TV. We have to do all of these other things. And as much as I want the big money out of politics, we're not there yet. And so the incumbent has this war chest. I have to have some, we have to have some money just to be able to do the things that we know we need to do to get out. And so that's what we did. So this time I'm like, hey, thank you for the $3. But you have $27, I bet. Do you have $27 that you could give? And if you don't have it today, can you give $27 next month? Can you put that in your, can you put that in your budget? And so that's the way I went. Oh, but you got 500. I know you do. You gave that other person $500 and you gave me $7. Like what, so I was very intentional this time. And so now we've raised over $1 million, so that helped out a lot. And then also being a movement candidate, so as a registered nurse, all of a sudden nurses are heroes when COVID-19 hit and people were like, oh, now I understand why you've been talking about Medicare for all of this time. Now I get the job status shouldn't be connected to healthcare. We thought you were a quack before. Now we get it, so that has helped. The fact that I was vulnerable when I went through my own COVID-19 situation and I was talking about what happened to me, I was very open. So people just started to help and people kicked in and donated. But then when George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were murdered, just linking back up and being who I am as an activist, not pushing that away. People were able to see, okay, she's authentic. And even while she's at the end of her race, she chose to not push away being this activist and hide that. She used that to show people that this is what active leadership can be. And so having that, there's this base that comes with that. And people are working with you and people want to work alongside with you. And that's what they found.
Yeah, that's so interesting you bring that up, but didn't think about that. But the name Bush in St. Louis after 2000 especially is, that's a burden to bear. It might not occur to you off the top. Thank you so much. I want to turn to Jamal now. Last Friday, you endorsed a slate of progressive candidates that, in your words, stands with working people, not the political establishment. You're a middle school principal who unseated one of the most powerful folks in Congress. As this movement picks up steam and you look forward, what's kind of on your list? What do you envision a more grassroots-centered Congress being able to accomplish over the next couple of years?
I mean, the possibilities are endless. If we continue to organize both here locally in the district and across the country, the possibilities are endless. We have the opportunity to hold elected officials accountable from across the country. So moderate Democrats and Republicans, the more we continue to grow this progressive movement, the more accountable we can hold our colleagues in other states and hopefully strongly encourage them to support progressive policies. So right now, that's just building in the House, and I'm not there yet, but looking from the outside in, I see it beginning to build and I see it beginning to generate the requisite momentum that's needed. And again, 2018 was just the beginning when my sisters in the squad were able to win their positions. Now we're more than doubling up in terms of those who are coming in with an unapologetically progressive platform rooted in and centering racial and economic justice. So you spoke earlier about how 50% of those in Congress are millionaires. And as you were reading the numbers of the net worth of some of the people in Congress, I was blown away. And my first question was, damn, how can I get some of that money, right? How can I get some of that money? But the reason why I ran, and the reason why I'm sure one of the reasons Corey ran and Rashida does what she does on a daily basis is because it's time for wealth to be equitably and equally distributed throughout the entire nation and not concentrated in the hands of a few. And it's time for wealth to be equally distributed and not concentrated in the military industrial complex or over policing, and begin to be shared equitably in healthcare, in education, in housing, in jobs and job training programs. So it's an inside outside strategy, right? So it's being very strategic on the inside. And now that our numbers are growing, we're going to be able to do more of that while also organizing on the outside, but organizing nationally. So for me, it's like, okay, I'm an educator. I was able to pull this off. How do I connect with other educators in South Carolina, North Carolina, Kentucky, and different areas of the country who may not be as engaged in electoral politics? How do I engage with historically ignored, neglected, and disenfranchised communities to pull them into the conversation, not just here, but across the country, so that we can consistently apply that outside pressure while being very strategic on the inside? And some of those conversations are already happening with myself, Corey, Rashida, and the rest of the squad and others. So, we're looking forward to getting things done once we get there.
Thanks. I want to ask about something that we touched on a little bit earlier, sort of the common politics as usual criticism of this movement maybe, is that they're worried about primary contests, right? Between Democrats challenging incumbents from the left, saying that it wastes democratic resources and creates a tax that can be used in general elections. So after her 2018, Representative Ocasio-Cortez described herself not as running from the left, but as running from the bottom, as working to represent these working class families in the way that we've been talking about. I'm wondering, and I'll ask Representative Tlaib, but I'd love to hear from all of you, how would you distinguish this group of movement-oriented lawmakers? Like, what does that term really mean? And maybe how do its members' lived experience play into the way that both you make your pitch to voters and also you do the work in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, Jay, I think many of us are so incredibly rooted and connected to community. So much of what we do and our passion, even our anger, which is justified, and the way we're, talking about issues haven't been spoken in that way. It's interesting because, it's of course we want meaningful action and change. We don't want just Congress to look differently. We want us to be able to talk about issues differently and feel differently for people. But I mean, I think Jamal and Corey can talk more about this because they ran against incumbents, but it gets to a point where that disconnection is real, and it's obvious from how they won, of the person that's serving there and not being rooted, not coming, home to their district, not being engaged on what's happening on the ground, and again, moving with a force that is matching what the needs of the community is. But it absolutely is very much grassroots. When you talk about movement, folks, I mean, John Conyers, who was in this seat for 5 decades, I believe, he carried the bullhorn, went out in the streets, marched against police brutality 50-something years ago, and he went from on the streets onto the United States House floor, and he won. I don't know if Corey or Jamal even know this. My predecessor won by like 100 votes. That's how close it was. And I won by, I think, 900 votes. But many people, including people in the African-American community, many of it was like, no, this not you, someone. And there was this hesitation, but he was so connected to the community and to the ground that he was able to win that pretty historic election. But Corey and Jamal can talk more about this, but it's obvious when you're sitting out there and you're a principal, you're a nurse, and you're like, what is what is going on? Why isn't my member of Congress funding Medicare for all? Why isn't my person talking about, equitable education funding? Why isn't this, again, that disconnect was so real. And that's, I think, what motivated us to run in the seats that we ran in. But it absolutely, when you talk about movement, folks don't understand that it's the grassroots groups. Many of the folks that are on the streets now during this uprising, many of them work in nonprofit sectors, many of them working on environmental issues, many of them working on education issues, and all of which they don't feel like their work is connected to how policy is made. And that's where I think many of us come in.
I'm muted. There it was, the one mute mistake. It's not an episode of the briefing without one. I'll ask the same question of Corey, since you touched on it earlier. Being a movement legislator, what people hear that term, they're not sure what it means. How do you define it, and what does it look like in practice?
So I've said several times that, you know, walking into the doors of Congress, you know, after being elected on the 3rd, hopefully, I'll be walking in as a politivist. Yes, I'll be walking in as a politivist. You know, I'm not going to rub off the rough edges of being an activist to come in. No, those edges are going with me, because there is something about being an activist, a movement, someone from a movement going into those halls. Because, so first of all, there is this lived experience. Lived experiences changes so many things. It's great, you know, hearing what happened to other people, and, you know, trying to empathize and advocate for them. You know, that's the way to do things. I get it. But then there's another thing about lived experience. There are things that we can speak to that someone else would have to do a lot of work to get that same information. So we're able to hit it head on. And to me, there is a humility that comes in this work. So, you know, when I think about other candidates that have run for local office, so we have Bruce Franks Jr. In St. Louis, who was also out there in Ferguson with me, who became a state rep. And then his predecessor, his successor, Rasheen Aldridge, came in and took the seat after him. All three of us were out there on the ground. There is this humility, understanding that, like AOC said, from the ground, from the bottom, you know, instead of from the left. Because when we think about it, we didn't have much help from the left while we were running for office. We had to do it like apart from, you know, from any structures, any left structures, because they have a particular machine that they, in a way of doing things, and they weren't necessarily accepting of us, especially because we were challenging incumbents. So for us, we had to do it all on our own. So there was this bottom, but the thing is, one thing about the bottom for us is there was no, and I know Jamal can speak to this too, not knowing what to do was a big thing. Like, what do we do? Like, you know, how, like, just even knowing, it's one thing to run for office, it's another thing to know how, you know, and so we all had to learn those things, and then we were doing it because we have that extra, this extra piece of trying to keep the authenticity of our movements while we're running for office. So that whole thing helps you taking that into Congress is also that reminder of, while I'm in Congress, I have to remain authentic to why I ran and the people of my district and who I am as that movement candidate. We are powerful simply because we've learned how to use our power, our voices, our feet, our hands, and everything else, our markers. You know, we've learned how to use those to apply pressure in the areas that we want to see change in. And then we don't let up. Like, we know how to continue on. Look, we protested in Ferguson more than 400 days, and then went back out and protested again in 2017, and then again now in 2020. And then people all across the country have done the same thing. So, well, similar things. So we know how to apply the pressure. So hopefully now I can be the one to, as pressures being pressed, or that soft pitch is being thrown to me, I can be there on home plate to hit it, and make sure that we bring home a win, working with, you know, the squad and so many others in Congress. I don't think that we need to take candidates like me lightly. We don't need to look at it as it's a one-off in New York. Well, two in New York, it's one in the Midwest, it's one here, it's one there. We don't need to look at it like that, because the same ones that they keep saying, where they say we can't do it, or these are one-offs and lightning struck and all of that, we're the ones that's going back to go get more. So they better see that this thing is not just a thing that's right now, it's a movement. We're movement candidates. That's what we know to do. We're movement folks. So we're going to continue to make this thing move and add to what we have now.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jamal.
No, I would just add that the movement and the people, that's where my energy and my inspiration and my life force comes from. Like, I'm not comfortable in a stuffy office, having meetings and setting agendas and having conversations that aren't rooted in the needs of the people in this district and across the country. So even before running for office, you know, I was part of an education movement pushing back against a privatization agenda and a system that was harmful to kids and families, period, point blank, and harmful to those who are in historically ignored communities more than anywhere else. So I came from a movement to run for office, and that movement remained with me throughout the run. Now, in terms of how we govern, it's about remaining connected to the movement and working with those in the movement to introduce policy that is centered around and rooted in the needs of our districts, period. Like, I used to live in the projects. I didn't live in Wall Street or near Wall Street or on Park Avenue in New York City. So it's lived experience, is where I come from, both personally and professionally, and it's what needs to continue overall. So that's where I'm plugged in. That's where my life force comes from. That's what drives me, the needs of the people, the needs of people at the bottom. That's what I've always been about.
Thank you. I know we're getting to the top of the hour. I want to ask one more question about strategy. Generally speaking, a progressive agenda, it probably can't go anywhere if Democrats don't control the House. I mean, you can call me a cynic, but I'm not expecting like a breakaway progressive movement within the Republican Party anytime soon. So I want to ask, like, especially Corey and Jamal, your districts are safely Democratic, safely blue, as is that of Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, who defeated Joe Crowley in 2018. I'm wondering, what role is there for the progressive movement, for this sort of people-centered movement that we're talking about, and for challenging maybe more centrist Democrats elsewhere in purple districts? How does this model translate in places that aren't quite as blue? How do you broaden it?
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I was going to tell you. Go.
No, you always let me go first. Go ahead.
Well, so there are tens of millions of people across this country who are not consistently politically engaged. And they're not engaged because we haven't done a good enough job of engaging them. This is not on them, this is on us. So we have to continue to grow and build this movement as elected officials to pull people in who have been ignored and disenfranchised. So in our race here, we were able to triple voter turnout. We were able to triple turnout amongst young people and people of color. And when you walk through the district, there's a new level of excitement that hasn't been felt in quite some time, because people feel like they are a part of the change. So we went from 30,000 votes, overall votes in 2018 to 90,000 in 2020. There's still another 240,000 registered Democrats in this district. So it's about engaging all of them, not just in voting in primaries and in the general, but in helping to grow the movement across the country. We have to do better of engaging all populations and pulling them in to the conversation. And that's part of my charge. And I know Corey's very passionate about that as well. And that's the work we got to do going forward.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that 100%. I think that we are, I think that it's on us to make sure that we are present, because one thing about the work that we are doing, oftentimes it was that we felt that the other person was not, and so we wanted to see something different. I truly believe in everything that I wanted to see from my congressperson. I need to try my best to be that, because if it was what I wanted to see, so many other people felt like this is what we want and that's not what they were getting. So then that's what we need to be. And then also, when we show up, we can't showing up to the meeting, showing up to the Democratic club, the Democratic dinners and all of that. Okay, that has its place, but I need to show up at the basketball game for this high school. I need to show up, I need to show up at the middle school, and just walk in one day and just talk to, and just let it be seen that their congressperson cares about them. We need to show up. And when we talk about progressives, broadening, you have to broaden that out, because the thing is, people get hung up on this title too, so where am I going? Am I going in saying, hey, I'm the progressive and I want you to, I'm bringing this to you? No, I'm going in and I want to make sure you have health care, you and your granny and your kids. I want to make sure that if you're transient, that you don't miss the Medicaid form and now your kids don't have access to health care. Now I want to make sure that regardless of where you live and how old granny is and what her conditions are, that all of you have health care, that with you have this mental health crisis, I want to make sure that you have the medications that you need. So that's what I'm bringing. And so I think that we have to be willing to go wherever we can go to meet the people where they are. To me, that is part of the progressive movement that I feel is going to connect people. Like Jamal said, that's on us. We have to do that work. And so that work won't happen in places where we're going to preach to the choir. We have to go out and we have to engage other voters. Like for us, it was I think we ended up with 23,000. I think it was just like a huge number. It was 12,000 in one part of the district, and I think another 10, I think in another part of the district, that we were able to engage that hadn't voted before, or that we had registered and they finally voted for the first time. And then some people who were registered, they just had never voted. We engaged our immigrant population in a way that hadn't been done. We had so many people from our immigrant population that were registered, but they had just never voted. They never felt like anybody cared, or anybody cared to not only outreach them, but to stay engaged. But they showed up and they voted for the first time. That's what we have to do. We can't be afraid to do that. In our formerly incarcerated communities, our unhoused communities, like that's the work. To me, being present is a big part of the work.
I mean, I think all of you are on point. Being accessible, honestly, is creating that partnership and relationship that strengthens your credibility in Congress. I mean, I don't know how many times people will come up to me, Corey and Jamal, and say, well, no, this water shut off. I said, no. Let me tell you what water shut off does to a mother in my district. The next day, Child Protective Services shows up. People are literally allowing folks to lose their children because they can't afford water, because water's become for profit. They're doing it to our schools, our prisons. Now they want our water, and that's exactly the direction it's going in. But I think, Jay, your question is all different levels of, how do we really make that change? It really reminds me of the 8-year-old little girl who's probably 10 now. She's 10 now, and her name is Rianne, and she came up to me. She had this like t-shirt on, and then she had this blazer on, and she kept going like this to the blazer. And as a mother, Corey knows that means like she wants you to notice the blazer. So I was like, oh, nice blazer, Rianne. And she's like, I'm trying to look like you. And, I'm just looking at her. I was like, well, forget running for Congress, run for president of the United States. And she was like, And I don't think people realize, the little Jamals of the world, little Corys are looking up and like literally are now seeing themselves in these spaces that they can make real change. And I just feel like this is the transformative change that's going to happen. Is it going to happen right away? No. But we staying completely unapologetically ourselves, moving with that sense of urgency that's connected to the ground and to the grassroots folks. The movement is the people. Like when we talk about the movement, sometimes I'm always afraid that people don't understand. We're talking about real people. The movement is not some sort of box or some building. It's people that make up a lot of this moving in this direction of, again, meaningful action and change. But it is, to me, the seeds that we are obviously planting out there of people that look like us, that talk like us, that understand these different experiences. And Shirley Chisholm, first African-American woman ever to serve in Congress, used to say, bring your own chair. And I'm in the mode of, no, I don't know if expanding the table is really the answer, because we always seem to be still the smaller portion of that table. I'm all for like shaking the table and taking someone's chair, especially if they haven't done anything to better people's lives. So we're doing that and in so many ways. And so I'm very, very inspired. Even though like Corey and Jamal are coming in like, oh, look, Rashida. I was like, nah, you all making me feel like, oh yeah, this is getting better. It's going to get better. So I know now I can go, huddle in the corner with Jamal and Corey and say, Okay, it's not us, it's them, right? They're the problem, right? I just want to make sure that right? I mean, people are dying because they can't afford prescription drugs. Am I right, Corey? And Corey's gonna be like, hell yes. And so that's I think that building up that kind of solidarity and working together in partnership and understanding, like, we just finished coming and talking to thousands of people that are telling us, help us. Please make government about us first. Please put us first. We didn't need a pandemic to tell us that there's an economic divide. We didn't need a pandemic to tell us that the healthcare system is broken. We didn't need the pandemic to tell us that structural racism exists. So I just know that we are just going to get increasingly more, I think, relevant in these spaces where, again, we are able to bring that credibility, that transformative change that's happening out on the ground during this uprising into the halls of Congress. So I'm excited. You have no idea. I can't stop smiling when I think of Corey and Jamal.
Representative Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, Corey Bush, watch your chairs out there, folks. I want to thank all of our guests for joining us today. I also want to thank you for agreeing in advance to this show to sing a happy 100th birthday to the briefing. But unfortunately, we are out of time, so we will skip that. I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in today. Please follow The Appeal News on Facebook and The Appeal on Twitter for more news, shows, and updates just like this one.